The winter had arrived early that year in Cedar Valley, a quiet, rural town nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. Snow blanketed the landscape in pristine white, but the air was sharp, biting at noses and ears, and every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. Most of the town's residents huddled indoors, tending to crackling fireplaces or cranking up their heaters, grumbling about the cost of oil and the endless cold that seemed determined to linger until March. Except for one man, Eli Turner. Eli wasn't like the others. He was tall, wiry, with a weathered face carved by years of wind, sun, and stubbornness. He had a wild streak, the kind of person who could see potential where everyone else saw nonsense. That streak had led him to the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a ramshackle place with peeling paint and a sagging roof that most people considered unlivable. Neighbors had whispered for years about Eli, shaking their heads when he built his windmill, or planted a garden in the swampy soil behind his barn. He didn't care what they thought. That morning, Eli trudged through the deep snow with a wheelbarrow, its wooden handles slick with ice. Inside was the brown, pungent manure from his small herd of goats and chickens. He had been collecting it for months, letting it age and ferment in a pile behind the barn. People called it madness. The Turner property already had a reputation. The unkempt yard, the smell that drifted over the fence on warm days, and Eli himself, who was often seen talking to the animals as if they understood him. "You're insane, Eli," a voice called from the edge of the street. It was Mrs. Carmichael, a retired schoolteacher with hair always set perfectly, a scarf wrapped neatly around her neck. She waved a gloved hand at him, her eyes narrowing. "What in the world are you doing now?" Eli glanced over his shoulder, his face breaking into a faint, knowing smile. "Just taking care of business, Maureen," he replied, not breaking stride. He had long ago stopped worrying about the tone in neighbors' voices. Mrs. Carmichael shook her head. "That pile of that stuff next to your house, you do realize it's freezing outside, you'll just rot it into nothing." Eli didn't argue. He had a plan, one he had been refining for months in secret. He pushed the wheelbarrow up the slope to the exterior walls of his home and began stacking the manure in thick layers against the siding. Each handful landed with a damp thud, and a faint, earthy smell mingled with the crisp winter air. By mid-morning, the pile had grown taller than Eli's waist, leaning against the side of the house like a protective rampart. From the road, it looked chaotic, almost obscene, an eyesore to anyone else. Children who walked past on their way to the bus pointed and laughed. Their parents exchanged whispers, some shaking their heads in judgment, others hiding snickers behind gloved hands. "You're just asking for trouble," said Mr. Hensley, a neighbor whose white beard seemed permanently frozen with disapproval. "Snow, rain, that stuff's going to rot your walls. You'll regret it." Eli didn't flinch. He had read about the heat generated by decomposing organic matter, how microbial activity could create a surprising amount of warmth. He had calculated the angles, the thickness, and the density required to produce the effect he wanted. Most people would never attempt it, dismissing it as ridiculous, but Eli thrived on the absurd. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the snow in pale pinks and golds, Eli returned to his farmhouse. He lit a small lamp, its glow flickering across the wooden interior. The house was drafty. The wind whistled through cracks in the walls, and the old pipes groaned like protesting ghosts. Most nights he would have built a roaring fire in the stove, but tonight he was eager to test his experiment. He pressed his hand against the exterior wall where the manure had been piled. At first it was cold, unyielding, as if the snow had frozen it solid. But after a few minutes, a faint warmth began to seep through, almost imperceptible at first. Eli's heart quickened. He whispered under his breath, "Come on, come on." Inside, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the wind outside. Slowly, the warmth grew, spreading through the walls like tendrils of life reaching into every corner of the old farmhouse. Eli placed a thermometer against the interior wall, watching the needle climb. 10 degrees, 15, 20. A steady, slow rise that made his chest tighten with triumph. Outside, the wind howled and snowflakes spiraled down from the dark sky. Neighbors huddled behind curtains, peering at the glow from Eli's windows. Some shook their heads, muttering about the man who piled manure against his home like a fool. But Eli didn't care. He had already felt the first tangible proof that his method worked. Days passed and the temperatures outside plummeted further. Cedar Valley experienced one of the coldest spells in a decade. Houses froze from within, pipes cracked, and residents cursed the heating bills that climbed higher than they had imagined. Yet inside Eli's farmhouse, it was warm, comfortably, naturally warm. No fuel burned, no bill increased, just the slow, steady heat radiating from the walls. Word began to spread, initially in hushed, skeptical tones. "Did you hear about Eli Turner?" someone would ask. "He's living like it's spring even with all this snow." People were curious, but most were still too proud or too stubborn to believe it. And so, for a while, Eli remained the laughingstock of Cedar Valley, a madman living in a foul-smelling fortress of Manure, somehow thriving in the depths of winter. One night, a young reporter named Claire Hastings came to the edge of Eli's property. She had curly brown hair tucked under a knit hat, a notebook in hand, and a camera slung across her shoulder. She had driven through the valley, drawn by the rumors, and now stood peering at the scene. The high pile of manure, the snow-dusted goat pen, and the small farmhouse with a single flickering light. "Mr. Turner," she called into the cold, her voice carrying. Eli emerged from the farmhouse, wiping his hands on his trousers. "That's me," he said. His voice was rough but steady, carrying the confidence of a man who had nothing to prove to anyone but himself. Claire stepped closer, her curiosity overtaking her initial hesitation. I've heard people say you're heating your house with, well, manure." Eli chuckled, the sound echoing off the snow. "That's what I've been telling them, and it works." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Works? You mean like warm enough to live comfortably through a Vermont winter?" Eli nodded. "Exactly. No fuel, no bills going through the roof, just nature doing its thing." She scribbled furiously in her notebook. "And the neighbors, they don't believe you." He shrugged. "Most don't, but I've never cared much for what people believe. I care about what I can see, feel, and make real." Claire paused, studying the man in front of her. There was a fire in his eyes, a stubborn determination that didn't just come from eccentricity, it came from conviction. She could see why the community had dismissed him for years. His methods were unconventional, even grotesque to some. But she could also see the proof, hidden just beneath the surface, in the warmth radiating from the walls behind him. The wind picked up, rattling the piles outside. Claire shivered and zipped her coat tighter. "You must be freezing out here." Eli smiled. "Cold is temporary, warmth is enduring." As she turned to leave, her mind buzzing with questions, a small whine broke through the cold night air. One of Eli's goats had slipped from the pen, brushing against the snow-covered fence. Eli moved quickly, scooping up the animal with ease, speaking to it in gentle tones that melted even Claire's skepticism. It was in that quiet, unassuming moment that the full measure of Eli Turner became clear. A man who saw potential in what everyone else discarded, who trusted the rhythms of life when others relied on machines and bills, and who refused to bow to ridicule. The laughter of the neighbors continued, faint and distant, but Eli's laughter, soft, private, victorious, echoed across the snow-covered fields. And somewhere, deep in the walls of that old farmhouse, heat was building, silently, stubbornly, triumphing over the cold that had claimed the rest of Cedar Valley. Winter in Cedar Valley had a way of testing people's patience. The snow that had started as soft, playful flakes now pressed down in relentless sheets, piling against fences, barns, and the old roads that twisted through the hills. By late January, the town was buried under more than 3 feet of snow in some places. Residents trudged through icy streets with frozen cheeks, scraping frost from car windows, and worrying about the escalating heating bills that seemed to climb by the day. Meanwhile, Eli Turner thrived. He had spent the early mornings checking the piles of manure pressed against the exterior walls of his farmhouse, adjusting where necessary to maintain proper density. Every handful had a purpose. He rotated layers, tamped down loose spots, and sometimes added a sprinkle of straw to accelerate the decomposition. To anyone else, it looked absurd, like a man trying to barricade himself against the world with dirt and dung. But to Eli, it was precision engineering. By mid-February, something remarkable began to happen. The warmth wasn't just contained within the farmhouse walls anymore. It seeped into the ground around the foundation. Frost that normally hardened into unyielding ice now softened near the walls. The air immediately adjacent to the manure piles carried a faint, almost imperceptible heat. Curious neighbors began to notice. "You seeing this?" whispered Mr. Hensley to Mrs. Carmichael one morning as they trudged past Eli's Purdy, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. "The snow, it's melting around his house." Mrs. Carmichael squinted. "That's impossible, there's no way." "You think I'd lie?" Hensley muttered. His beard had icicles forming along the edges, his breath puffing white clouds into the air. "I'm telling you it's warm near the walls, and I've been walking past this place for 20 years. I know what snow should look like." Word spread slowly at first, the kind of cautious whispering that rural towns are famous for. Some people laughed it off entirely. Some drove by, curious but skeptical, their cameras out, snapping photos like tourists documenting a local oddity. A few, however, felt the tug of intrigue, that quiet pull of wondering if perhaps the strange, stubborn man on the outskirts of town was onto something extraordinary. Inside his farmhouse, Eli worked tirelessly. He had converted the kitchen table into a laboratory of sorts, with jars of soil, notes in meticulous handwriting, thermometers, and even a small laptop where he logged temperatures and humidity readings. Every day was a discovery. Every day confirmed his theory. Microbial activity within the decomposing manure generated more heat than conventional insulation could, and it did so without the cost, the pollution, or the risk of fire. One night around 10, he heard the crunch of boots in the snow. He opened the door to find Claire Hastings standing there again, notebook in hand, her breath fogging the cold night air. "I had to see it for myself," she admitted, a sheepish smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "The snow around your house, it's melting. Even with this cold snap, the ground's, I don't know, soft." Eli stepped aside and gestured toward the faint steam rising from the edges of the piled manure. "It's the heat from the decomposition. Microbes do their work and the heat follows. Nature's own furnace." Claire's eyes widened. "I've written about alternative energy, sustainable farming, but this is something else entirely." Eli chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm not interested in fame or grants. I just want to prove that you can live sustainably, that you can work with nature instead of constantly fighting it." She scribbled furiously, her curiosity and disbelief battling for dominance. "And the smell? Don't people complain?" He smiled knowingly. "It's strong at first, sure, but when it's managed properly, it's barely noticeable inside the house. Outside, well, people need to get used to it. Most of them will. Nature has a smell whether you like it or not." The next day, the skepticism in Cedar Valley began to falter. Farmers who had been battling freezing pipes and skyrocketing heating costs started to peer over the fences. One by one, they approached Eli, hesitantly asking questions, watching him explain his process with quiet authority. "You mean to tell me," said a farmer named Jim Kessler, scratching his graying head, "that you've been heating your whole house with manure?" "Yes," Eli said simply, "and it works efficiently, safely." Jim laughed nervously. I don't know if I believe it yet." "Come by in the morning," Eli suggested. "I'll show you the inside. You can feel the heat yourself." The demonstration changed minds. Walking into the farmhouse was like stepping into a world insulated from winter itself. The air was crisp but comfortably warm. Steam curled from a kettle on the stove, but no fire had been lit for hours. Thermometers on the walls showed temperatures far above the freezing point outside. Even the floorboards radiated heat, a gentle, constant warmth. Word spread faster now. Local news caught wind of it. By mid-February, a small crew of reporters and camera operators arrived, eager to document the phenomenon. Eli greeted them with his usual calm, though his heart raced with the thrill of vindication. "This is Eli Turner," the cameraman said, gesturing to the wiry man. "He's a local farmer and apparently a genius." Eli waved modestly. "I wouldn't call it genius, just observation and patience." One reporter, a young man named Victor, bent down to feel the heat radiating from the walls. This is incredible," he muttered. "I've never felt anything like it. How long have you been doing this?" "Since November," Eli said. Carefully, slowly, watching, measuring, adjusting. Nature does the work, but you have to guide it. By the end of the day, video footage captured the warmth, the smell, the carefully managed piles of manure, and Eli's quiet confidence. When it aired on the local news that evening, the response was a mix of awe and incredulity. Social media posts flooded in, calling him everything from eccentric genius to madman with a manure house. But the proof was in the warmth. People could argue, doubt, or ridicule all they wanted. But the house remained warm, even as the temperature outside plunged into negative double digits. Eli's solitude began to shift subtly. Curious visitors came, farmers, scientists, reporters, even environmental activists, all drawn by the impossible idea of heating a home sustainably through decomposition. Most expected to find a filthy, smelly disaster. Instead, they discovered warmth, precision, and a man who treated the earth with respect, who saw value in what others discarded. One evening, as the sky bled purple and gold over the snow-covered hills, Eli sat on the porch with Claire, sipping a mug of tea. The wind howled across the fields, but inside the house thrummed with warmth. "You know," Claire said, her breath fogging the cold air, "I came out here expecting, I don't know, to see madness. Instead, I see hope. You're showing people another way." Eli stared at the horizon, quiet for a moment. Hope is just seeing what's possible before others do. Some people never see it, no matter how close it is. Claire smiled. "Well, you're making them see it now." And for the first time in months, Eli allowed himself a rare, small smile of triumph. The winter would continue its assault, but he had already begun to rewrite what people thought was possible. The laughter of the neighbors had faded into background noise, replaced by cautious curiosity and awe. Yet even as the warmth radiated through the farmhouse, a shadow lingered at the edge of the story, one that Eli hadn't anticipated. Not everyone who came to watch and report carried goodwill. Some eyed his work with suspicion, jealousy, or fear. And in a small town like Cedar Valley, word traveled fast, especially when someone had already been labeled a madman. One night late, as Eli checked the perimeter of the house, he noticed footprints in the snow that didn't belong to him or his visitors. They circled the farmhouse, hesitant, probing. Someone had been watching, studying the manure piles, perhaps looking for a way to discredit or sabotage him. Eli's eyes narrowed. The warmth that had been his triumph now also attracted risk, but he refused to falter. "Let them watch," he muttered to himself. "They'll learn soon enough." Somewhere in the distance, the faint glow of other houses flickered through the snowstorm. Inside his walls, warmth pulsed quietly, unrelenting, a living testament to patience, ingenuity, and stubbornness. Outside, the cold waited. But for the first time, Eli Turner felt ready for anything. Spring was supposed to arrive in Cedar Valley, but the winter had overstayed its welcome. Snowdrifts lingered stubbornly in the shaded hollows, and frost still clung to the roofs of most homes. But Eli Turner's farmhouse had become a strange island of warmth in a frozen sea. By March, it wasn't just a curiosity, it was a symbol of possibility. Farmers, scientists, and journalists came more frequently now, some genuinely interested, others hungry for the sensational story. Eli welcomed most of them with a quiet patience that bordered on ceremony. He walked them along the sides of the house, explaining the layers, the rotation, and the decomposition process with meticulous detail. His hands were always moving, demonstrating, guiding, shaping, like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of warmth and decay. "You've created a living heater," Claire said one afternoon, her voice tinged with awe. "It's not just the house, this is an ecosystem, isn't it?" Eli nodded. "Exactly, it's alive. Microbes, straw, manure, everything working together. You just have to respect the rhythm, feed it, and let it do its thing." Even the skeptics could not deny it anymore. The snow melted in rings around the house. Soil remained soft and workable despite freezing air temperatures, and inside, the farmhouse remained comfortably warm. For most of Cedar Valley, the concept of heating a house without electricity, oil, or wood seemed absurd. But seeing Eli's success left them with no choice but to question what they thought was possible. Yet for all the acclaim and curiosity, a quieter battle was beginning. Not all neighbors were pleased with Eli's growing reputation. Some felt threatened, old rivalries, jealousy, and fear of change surfaced in small-town whispers. By mid-March, rumors began circulating. Is Eli using chemicals? What if his piles catch fire? Who's going to clean up after him? One evening, as Eli stacked fresh manure against the northern wall, he noticed a figure lurking near the tree line at the edge of his property. The figure was obscured by shadow, but their presence was unmistakable. "Who's there?" Eli called, his voice calm but firm. The figure bolted before he could respond. Footprints revealed someone had been watching for days, studying the piles, the rotation, the composting patterns. Eli realized that curiosity alone was not driving this visitor. Someone was plotting, perhaps hoping to discredit or sabotage him. He tightened the piles against the walls, arranging them with extra care. Every layer was compacted, every corner reinforced. Inside, he checked the temperature. E-gauges, consistent, steady, living warmth. The house was a fortress now, both in heat and in resilience. 2 days later, a loud knock echoed across the farmhouse door. Eli opened it to find Victor, the reporter who had first marveled at the walls, looking unusually tense. "Mr. Turner," Victor said, his breath visible in the cold, "something's happening outside your property. People are there taking your manure piles, small amounts, but they're disappearing overnight." Eli frowned. "Stealing my piles, why?" Victor shook his head. "I don't know, maybe they want to prove it doesn't work. Maybe they're jealous, but it's not just one person, it's several. They've been careful, but it's deliberate." Eli closed the door, his mind racing. Someone was trying to sabotage him, to steal the very foundation of his experiment. He knew he couldn't confront them openly. Public spectacle would only embolden the troublemakers. He needed strategy, patience, planning. The following nights were tense. Eli staked the corners of his property with motion-sensitive lights and cameras, watching silently from the shadows. Every night brought new footprints, new disturbances, but he also noticed patterns, how they approached, which corners they targeted when they retreated. Slowly, methodically, he learned their behavior. At the same time, inside the house, the warmth was constant, unwavering. It became a source of quiet reassurance. Every glance at the thermometers, every touch of the walls, reminded him that his work was real, tangible, and resilient. One particularly bitter night, as snow fell in heavy sheets, the intruders made their boldest attempt yet. 2 figures emerged from the tree line and moved quickly toward the northern piles. Eli, crouched in the shadows near the barn, waited. As they began to pry apart the layered manure, he stepped forward, voice calm but commanding. "Stop." The 2 froze. One turned startled while the other fumbled with the pile, revealing a frightened, almost guilty face. "This is my property," Eli said, stepping closer. "What you're doing is not just illegal, it's foolish. You can't take what you don't understand." The 2 exchanged a glance. One muttered something, then they bolted, disappearing into the night. Footprints crunched behind them, but Eli's heart, though pounding, felt steady. The piles were intact. The warmth, the proof of his work, remained untouched. Over the next week, he reinforced security and began experimenting with subtle variations in the layering process, adding straw and manure in a more precise pattern to maximize heat while minimizing exposure to potential tampering. His small home became a laboratory, a sanctuary, and a beacon all at once. By mid-April, the snow began to recede from the town, but the house remained warm, not just from the manure, but from Eli's growing confidence. Cedar Valley residents now approached him with genuine curiosity rather than ridicule. Local farmers came to watch, taking notes, asking questions, marveling at the practicality of a system they had long dismissed as absurd. Claire returned one evening as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the snow and thawing ground in shades of gold. She found Eli sitting on the porch, sipping tea. The warmth of the house radiated outward, melting frost along the edges of the steps. "You're changing minds," she said quietly. "People used to laugh at you, now they're thinking differently, about energy, about waste, about sustainability." Eli nodded, watching the faint steam rising from the manure piles. "Change is slow. Most people can't see beyond what they already know, but warmth is undeniable. They can feel it." Claire smiled. And it's more than warmth, it's hope. Eli allowed himself a small, private smile. He had endured ridicule, isolation, and sabotage, but he had persisted. His stubbornness, his patience, and his faith in the natural rhythms of life had paid off. The house was warm, the piles were secure, and Cedar Valley was beginning to listen. Yet despite this triumph, a quiet tension lingered. Someone or something was still watching. And Eli knew that in a small town where gossip could turn to action overnight, his next challenge would not be scientific but human. The winter had tested him. The neighbors had laughed. Now, as the warmth pulsed quietly through the walls, Eli Turner prepared for the next phase of his experiment, the one that would require more courage than any cold, any ridicule, or even the stubborn snow that still clung stubbornly to Cedar Valley. By late April, the first true signs of spring were pushing through the stubborn snowbanks of Cedar Valley. Crocuses and daffodils peeked from the thawing earth, and the air carried a damp, sweet scent that promised renewal. But Eli Turner's farmhouse remained a strange anomaly, a bastion of warmth, even as the rest of the town shivered from lingering frost and cold snaps. The events of the past. Winter had transformed him from a local eccentric into a quiet legend. Curious neighbors, once scornful, now watched with a mixture of awe and respect. Farmers came to learn, environmentalists came to study, and journalists continued to arrive with cameras and questions. Eli had become the man who could seemingly bend nature's rules, and yet he remained unassuming, almost reluctant in the spotlight. But the lingering threat from the shadowy intruders from the previous month had not dissipated. If anything, the warmer weather brought new challenges. With more people on the roads, more eyes wandering the outskirts, Eli knew he had to stay vigilant. The piles against the walls were not just a source of warmth. They were a testament to his knowledge, care, and perseverance. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of pink and orange over the hills, Eli noticed movement in the trees bordering his property. He froze, squinting through the fading light. Two figures emerged, cautiously approaching. They were careful, measured. But Eli recognized them immediately, the same intruders from weeks before, back for a closer look. He didn't panic. Instead, he waited. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped into view. The two froze, caught between curiosity and fear. "This is your last warning," Eli said, his voice calm but commanding. "You don't understand what you're meddling with. Step away." The taller of the two hesitated, then muttered, We just wanted to see if it really works." Eli's expression softened slightly. "You can see it, you can feel it, and now you've seen enough to know it's real. Take that knowledge and respect it, don't destroy it." The intruders glanced at each other, uncertainty written across their faces. Slowly they backed away, disappearing into the trees. Eli watched until they vanished, then returned to the farmhouse, heart steady but alert. It was a small victory, but one that reaffirmed his commitment to patience, precision, and trust in the natural process he had nurtured for months. Inside, the farmhouse was alive with warmth. The piles of decomposing manure against the walls hummed softly, radiating heat into every corner. Eli ran his hand along the interior wall and smiled. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a living system, a sustainable microcosm of innovation and resilience. Claire arrived that evening, camera slung across her shoulder, notebook in hand. She had been covering Eli's story for months, chronicling every triumph, setback, and oddity. Now, as she stepped onto the porch, she paused, taking in the glow of the house and the faint steam rising from the northern piles. "You did it," she said quietly, almost in awe. Eli chuckled. "We did it. Nature did the work, I just guided it." Claire stepped inside, the warmth enveloping her instantly. "It's incredible. I've seen solar, wind, even experimental geothermal, but this is something else entirely. You've turned what people threw away into life, into heat, into hope." Eli smiled, gazing out the window at the receding snow and the awakening fields. People laughed, they doubted, they even tried to destroy it. But all of that, it didn't matter. What matters is the work itself. The results speak louder than ridicule. The next morning, the town of Cedar Valley stirred with a sense of curiosity that bordered on reverence. Word had spread of Eli's triumph over the cold. Local farmers came with notebooks and thermometers, eager to observe. Children came to see the man who made his house warm with manure, though now their laughter was tinged with wonder rather than mockery. Even Mrs. Carmichael stopped by, bringing a freshly baked pie, and admitted sheepishly that she had underestimated him. "Eli," she said, placing the pie on the kitchen table, "I don't understand it, but I see it. You've done something remarkable. This is history in the making." Eli nodded, touched but quiet. "It's just a matter of paying attention, watching, learning, trusting what's alive." By afternoon, Victor and the other journalists were back, cameras rolling, microphones ready. They captured the transformation of the farmhouse from winter's coldest point to a haven of warmth and life. Eli explained the process again, slowly, deliberately, with clarity that left no room for doubt. The composting piles, the layering, the careful rotation, it all worked together to produce a sustainable, renewable heat source. When the segment aired that evening on local news, it went viral. Social media lit up with comments, shares, and debates. Some people still laughed, calling it strange or gross. But more and more recognized the genius in Eli's approach, the courage to try something unconventional, the patience to see it through, and the resilience to endure skepticism, sabotage, and isolation. As night fell, Eli stepped outside once more, the farmhouse glowing behind him. He looked across the snow-speckled hills, the first green shoots of spring, pushing through the frozen ground. The wind was gentle now, almost warm, carrying with it a faint, earthy scent of possibility. Claire joined him on the porch, her notebook closed, camera resting at her side. "You know," she said softly, "you've changed more than just your house. You've changed how people see what's possible." Eli nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction he had rarely allowed himself to experience. "Maybe, but the real change isn't just for them. It's for anyone who dares to trust nature, to work with it instead of against it. That's the lesson." A soft rustle in the trees reminded him that challenges never truly ended. But Eli Turner had learned the art of patience, the strength of conviction, and the warmth that comes from persistence. The winter had tested him, neighbors had laughed, and the odds had been stacked against him. But through ingenuity, resilience, and an unwavering belief in what he knew to be possible, he had triumphed. The farmhouse pulsed with heat, a quiet, living heartbeat against the fading cold. Outside, the world was awakening to spring. And inside, Eli Turner, the man once dismissed as a madman, smiled at the warmth he had created, knowing that he had done more than survive the winter. He had rewritten what was possible in Cedar Valley, one manure pile at a time. The laughter of skeptics had long since faded. What remained was quiet admiration, curiosity, and most importantly, proof. Eli pressed his hand to the wall one last time that night, feeling the gentle, steady warmth. A sense of triumph settled over him, a deep, unshakable understanding that persistence, patience, and faith in the unseen rhythms of nature could accomplish what machines, money, and ridicule could not. The night was calm, the farmhouse hummed with life, and for the first time Eli Turner felt completely, undeniably victorious.